Hey there, Instabinders. For the uninitiated among you, Instabinders are bookbinders and book artists who are on Instagram. And every month we have a challenge to make a book around a theme. And the theme for this month, which is May 2017, is grief. I just wanted to brainstorm some ideas for things if you are not immediately inspired by the topic, because I know not everybody was. You don't have to go down the deep, dark road of just soul-crushing grief. If that's not where you want to go. You can, if that's where you want to go. But I wrote down some sayings that I think of when I think of grief. And the first one that came to mind was, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. That's a quotation from scripture. And then the other one, the next one I thought of was, the cure for anything is salt water, sweat, tears, or the sea. Then we've got some phrases, like death by 1,000 cuts, asking for trouble, at death's door, better safe than sorry, the blue screen of death. I actually think that would make a hilarious book. Borrow trouble, come to grief. Oh, one more saying. This is a good one. It's a rhyme. It's an old rhyme. 1 for sorrow, 2 for mirth, 3 for a wedding, and 4 for birth. So definitions of grief, or synonyms, I guess. So on the one side you have deep sorrow, misery, sadness, anguish. On the other side you have trouble, annoyance, bother, and irritation, like the Charlie Brown good grief kind of grief. There's a spectrum of grief here, and actually I wanted to read a comment about this theme that one of you wrote. Grief is all-encompassing and includes events such as using up the last bit of specialty paper and hoping you've picked the right project, or moving out of a beloved house, or losing a class ring, or in my case, losing my wedding ring, wearing out the favorite old 45 of Freddie Fender's wasted days and wasted nights, retiring from a career, getting rid of that worn-out recliner. For some, the term grief triggers a deep loss that's a major, painful impact. But all grief is valid no matter the source. So I thought that was a good comment for people who may feel overwhelmed by the subject. I absolutely support the use of humor in this project. I am not going to go the route of humor just because that's not where I'm inspired to go right now. But I had some other questions that I thought I could ask you to get you thinking about grief and how you could create a book about grief. You can do that in words. You can write down words. One of my favorite things to do with students when I'm teaching writing classes is I like to ask them to write a story in 6 words or less. So if you could describe whatever grief that you are trying to depict with this book in 6 words or less, what words would those be? So push yourself to write the story of this grief in as few words as possible. And that could inspire you in a direction that was unexpected. Another way you could think about your book is, how could you represent grief in paper form? Would it be with texture? What kind of texture reminds you of grief? When I'm thinking about that, I'm actually thinking lead. It's very dense, it's very heavy, it's sharp, so I've got some lead right here, right? So this is lead type. It's so heavy. You throw this thing and it's gonna hurt somebody, and it's cold. It's very unforgiving, and I feel like a lead book, books made of lead where it would just be so heavy, that would be a good representation of grief. You could also think about color. What kind of what color represents grief to you? My mind immediately goes to black, but I actually feel like black's not the color. It could be for you, but grief is chaotic and noisy, and it's almost impossible to hear you inside of your grief. So it could be just scribbles of all different colors that is not very pretty, or you could go, there are different stages in grief, and at some stage you may have felt numb and completely closed off from feeling. And what would that be? Would that be a gray, or would it be white? So what colors come to mind when you think of grief? I also think, like, how would you use this book? Is it a small book that fits in your pocket that you carry with you everywhere? Or is it a big book that you pull off a shelf just every once in a while? And that could be dependent on where you are in your stage of grief. If it's fresh grief, it's going to be a different book than if it's old grief. And my idea for my book, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off because I haven't tried it yet, but my idea for this book is actually a tiny little black book, very small, with a single sheet of paper in it, but that piece of paper is actually folded and folded and folded and folded on itself as many times as I'm going to be able to get it to fold. There's a limit to how many times you can fold a single sheet of paper, so that when you open the book, it's one sheet, but that sheet just expands to be so much larger than the book. And what made me think of that was, a black hole, where the weight of this star has grown so much that it collapses on itself and becomes infinitely dense, but it holds the entire world inside of it, You could also think of not your own grief, but you could think of observing other people's grief. I have two friends who have lost children. One lost one child and another lost two children, and I did not know how to help them. I have never experienced the loss of a child, but just my vicarious sorrow for what they were going through was overwhelming. And what could I possibly have done to alleviate the loss of a child? Nothing I could say could replace the love they have for their babies. And it felt arrogant to think that I could help, and I felt helpless. So you could think of a book that talks about you observing someone else's grief and your feelings and your need and desire to help, but just not knowing how. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with, and if any of you need help with brainstorming or developing an idea, I'm definitely here to do that, because I love building ideas, and I'm never short on ideas, just short on time. Anyway, looking forward to it. See you guys.